Okay, everyone, welcome to our first panel. The second panel, by the way, will be convening at 2:30, and it will be covering alternatives to the Big Wind Undersea Cable project. What we're going to be talking about here, we're going to be addressing the idea of what the the Big Wind Undersea Cable project is and what its impacts are on the islands here. I'd like to introduce our panel members who will be sharing their thoughts with you on these ideas. By opposing the Big Wind Undersea Cable project, Friends of Lanai is fighting the imposition of an industrial wind power plant on 1/4 of its island. Friends of Lanai advocates for the use of decentralized, distributed, renewable energy sources to decrease Hawaiians' dependency on fossil fuel. Robin Kay, to my left, is the tireless and very unyielding spokesperson for the Friends of Lanai. Having represented the 18th District in the Hawaii State House of Representatives for 3 terms, legislator Lila Berg ran for Lieutenant Governor in the 2010 election. Now, prior to holding office, many of you know her as a teacher and vice principal at Molokai Intermediate and High School. She is very involved in empowering citizens and communities to engage in the democratic process leading to local problem solving. Lila, thanks for coming. On my far right, Henry Curtis is Director of Life of the Land, which at over 40 years old is one of Hawaii's oldest environmental and community action groups. Their mission is to preserve and protect the life of the land through sustainable land and energy policies while promoting open government through research, education, advocacy, and when necessary, litigation. Henry, thanks for coming. Daviana McGregor, a professor and founding member of the Ethnic Studies Department at the University of Hawaii, is a historian of Hawaii and the Pacific. Her ongoing research endeavors focus on documenting the persistence of traditional Hawaiian cultural customs, beliefs, and practices in rural Hawaiian communities. This work is featured in her book, Nakua Aina, Living Hawaiian Culture. Thank you, Daviana. When State Senator Mike Gabbard recently came to Molokai to gauge the community's response to Big Wind, our next panelist delivered an impassioned speech against the project. Janelle Hughes sits on this panel as a resident of Mauna Loa and whose roots on the island go back for generations. Ms. Hugh is a true citizen advocate. She's implacable in the defense of her community against an incursion of industrial wind turbines. Janelle Hughes. Several people came up to me today and asked to please begin with a brief overview of the Big Wind Undersea Cable proposal. So I'd like to start off with asking the panelists if they could give a little brief history and maybe the current status of the project.
Henry, you want to do it? The Big Wind project was proposed in 2008 for a couple reasons, depending on who you ask. One is that it was a reward for certain political contributors to the governor's campaign. The other was it prevents solar from being installed on Oahu because we have to reserve space for wind, and therefore protects the utility from rampant growth of renewables on Oahu.
What about the legislature? Where do they currently weigh in on the Big Wind proposal?
That's Life Lands Kuleana is the legislature and the Public Utilities Commission. The legislature is wrestling with this because, how to put it nicely, the House is very much tied to Castle and Cook, and therefore will do anything that Castle and Cook wants, the leadership of the House. And the Senate is more independent and is looking at it from a more holistic point of view. But the House and the Senate individual members are largely, for the most part, not energy oriented. They're working on much broader issues, and there's very few people in the legislature that have any real feel for energy policy. So they mostly, hi. So it's an issue of bringing community voice into the legislature and letting them know how we all feel. And this is really a critical year because every legislator member, every senator, and every House member is up for re-election. And the last thing they want is a highly controversial project to force them to make a decision one way or the other in the face of an election, because you don't want a bunch of angry people opposing what you're doing. And therefore, it's going to be a very, very interesting session.
And if I may add something, Greg, having been there most recently, I think we have to be really honest and recognize that we have a one-party system, and we have a governor. We have a governor who supports this project. So even if the legislature, which is made up of two chambers, House and Senate, even if they would disagree, there's still the governor that can trump what the decisions are of the legislature.
And I would just add one thing. I see one of your and our legislators here, and I want to call out Melly, because there are some legislators who have taken some courageous positions early on in this, and Melly Carroll is one of them. So thank you, Melly. There's a bill running through last year's chambers called Senate Bill 367, which would have given each Oahu resident, each Oahu person, the charge to pay for the cable. And a few people in the legislature voted against that when they could, and Melly was one of them.
Now, we hear that the undersea cable itself could cost upwards of $1 billion. Who owns it? Who pays for this?
That's a great question. The undersea cable, according to the bill that got stalled last year in the legislature, this bill called 367, it would be owned by a developer, but it would be paid for by us. And then later on, it's a very complicated bill, but basically, we would pay for it. HECO would be able to purchase it later on, but it would be charged to you at no risk to Hawaiian Electric. It's a wonderful, wonderful project for Hawaiian Electric.
So if I have this, understand this correctly, the companies take no financial risk in the construction of the cable, but they're able to use that asset for profit.
I went to a conference about 6 months ago, and a banker from an international bank that funds projects like this around the world said, this is a piece of cake for us. There's no risk involved because the taxpayers and the ratepayers pay for the whole thing. So why wouldn't we invest in this when we're guaranteed to get the money back at a 15 to 20% return? Now, I don't know what you get in your banks, but we're getting 0.5% at First Hawaiian on Lanai. So.
Okay, the wind industry and the electric companies also tell the consumers that the wind farms are going to lower their electric bills. Is this true?
No, it's not true. Actually, wind power has been thought of for a long time, but the only reason why it hasn't gone on a wide scale is because it was too expensive and it's unreliable. And so for the amount that you have to pay to get only electricity generated for a short period of time, it just wasn't worth the investment. But now that oil is selling at $100 a barrel, it becomes more cost efficient and profitable. But I don't know if you saw, there was a story on the news the other night about Tesoro phasing out, and one of their analysts was saying that in fact people think that renewable resources or locally generated energy resources is free, but in fact it's not even free, and it's more expensive than the cost of oil. It'll cost more than $100 to generate the same amount of electricity you would get out of oil. And that gentleman also said, you know, we will never see any cost break in our lifetime. Perhaps our grandchildren will then get a cheaper rate than what we are paying now.
one of the interesting financial parts of this that all of us should know, because all of us pay this, the developer, whether it's Pattern here or First Wind if they can come back, or Castle and Cook, if they spent $1 billion for the wind power plant on either island, they get back 65% of that in tax credits and a tax grant that you pay for. So if Murdoch spends $1 billion, he gets $650 million back of your money.
I just wanted to add, though, think about this concept of cost and what it really costs us on Molokai and on all of our islands, on Lanai, because you can't just look at the cost in terms of the rates that we pay, which will be higher. You have to look at the cost to our natural resources, to the loss of our access to the lands that people go to hunt, and access to fish. Those lands on West End where the towers will be constructed will be blocked from access for that purpose. So it's going to cost us in terms of our subsistence resources and our subsistence lifestyle. It's going to cost in terms of the impact to the reef when they have to blast it through to dig the start the undersea cable. It'll cost in terms of the impact to the whales, because it's going right through the whale sanctuary. It'll cost in terms of the impact to sharks. Sharks are highly, highly sensitive to electromagnetic waves. So these are all the costs that also have to be added in. And when you really add it up, these resources that are generated within Hawaii are really, really costly, and especially costly to Native Hawaiian communities like Molokai.
And while Hawaiian Electric touts the idea that there are a number of high voltage transmission lines on the bottom of the ocean around the United States, this would be the only one to go through a marine sanctuary. And its effect on the species is unknown, because the EMF generated by the cable would have an impact on the threatened species, on the food they eat, and on the species that eat them. And none of that is known.
Let's move to more of the adverse impacts of industrial scale wind energy facilities, because nothing on this scale has ever been constructed on Molokai or Lanai. So how will the existing island's infrastructure have to be altered to accommodate this massive project?
Okay, I'll touch on that. First of all, I'd like to say aloha Molokai. I'd like to thank everybody that came last night and came back with more people. Mahalo. The infrastructure of Molokai will be devastated. You see these poles and the cement. That's just the cement area, the base of the windmills. That's not accounting for the tractors and the trucks and the roads that will have to be widened and straightened. They'll be blowing up our land and not looking back. Your children's children will not be alive to see Molokai repair itself. We were just talking about how this affects endangered species. If you think for 1 minute that they're going to have pity on us because of endangered species, think again. Our president just approved a permit to kill golden eagles. Handed that permit to an industrial wind farm. So, if you think our deer and our whales and our seals are going to be crying out and be heard, think again. We need to empower our people's voice to vote this down now. We have to win it at their own game.
Many of us feel that it's the landscape that has really made us who we are. And I wanted to ask the panel what the impact of industrial wind turbines on culturally sensitive landscapes will be.
Well, I'll start on Molokai. You can add on Lanai. We're looking at, I don't know if you can see the balloons still. They're still, that's how high the towers are still going to be. And the, it's going to cover, it's 42 stories high. It's going to cover 18 square miles on the west end. Now, we don't know what part of the west end they're going to be situating the towers. But we do know that there are a lot of cultural sites all along the coastline and where there were village and settlements areas. Kaluakoi means the adze quarry, and there are numerous adze complexes throughout the area. And all those pu'us, every pu'u that you see there on the west end is an area where there's the kind of material, the stone that was used for making adzes. We had a presentation to IAM by Marshall Weisler, and he's been documenting all of the kind of stone that you get out of these pu'u, and every single one there has evidence that Hawaiians worked it to make adzes. So the extent of the cultural landscape is much more than we see just looking around. Halona has a lot of personal family history that he knows about really special sites within the area. And there are all fishing koa all along the coastline. So we have great concern. Nobody talks about the cable. What they have to do is the wind is generated through the turbines, and then it gets all into a power line, and it gets sent to one central location. And we've heard it's like a 10-story building or a 10-story building laid out flat, and they convert the energy into a form that can be sent out and transmitted through the cable. So there's going to be a huge footprint for the cable generation, that transformer, right along the shoreline somewhere in the west end, and they're not telling us where. At one point, they were thinking that it would be Kavakiu, and at that time, it was being suggested by a cabinet member to Governor Lingle, as we understand, and she told them they were not to go to Kavakiu because she knew how sensitive and important Kavakiu is. But that whole shoreline, all the south shoreline of Molokai and west end and the north end is all full of many, many cultural sites that have been preserved intact and will all be destroyed wherever they place the place that they're going to transform the energy to put it into the cable. But the important other area is what's going to be the impact on our barrier reef. We have the most pristine and largest barrier reef outside of Australia, and this cable will go right through that. So we're looking at the landscape on the land as well as the impact to the ocean and the reef and the marine ecosystem.
First of all, I'm remiss. I wanted to thank all of you for inviting me to come and share this struggle with you, and especially Kanoho and Aloha Molokai. The powers that be will try to split our islands, and they're already saying, well, Molokai has said no, so we'll focus all of the 400 on Lanai. And I want to ask you to help us say no, period. The impact on Lanai is going to be devastating, quite clearly. They're talking about 1/4 of the island. There's 89,000 acres on Lanai, and they're talking about 22,000 acres with 170 windmills, each the size of the first Hawaiian Bank building with the 747 attached to the roof. It's almost impossible to imagine. That's an area called Keahiakavelo, which has a rich connection between Molokai and Lanai, and there's wonderful tales about the relationship between the two islands that took place there. OHA funded an independent cultural study of that area, and so far we've found over 200 sites, including the largest heiau on our island, a whole number of house sites and ads workshops, so it's a significant issue for us. And
if we don't look at the wind sites themselves, but we look at the harbors and the roads, it's really significantly changing Molokai. It's making the harbor go from a small harbor to a harbor that can handle bringing in these giant equipment, the tractors, the wind farm components. And it's really making a highway to the wind turbines and then putting in a road network to every one of the turbine sites. And since you have to put the concrete in, you have to pour it on one site all at once, you need to have like 39 cement loaders all lined up in a row to pour in. You need a place to store that. It's a tremendous operation that's going to impact all aspects of Molokai.
And if I might add another perspective, because your question was about the impacts. You've been hearing about the cultural impacts. You've been hearing also about the environmental. And I would urge you to become more vocal about the impact on the human beings. I know Janelle will be talking about the health impacts, but I represent a voice from Oahu. And to be perfectly honest with you, my former colleagues, with the exception of Mele, because she has you as wind underneath her wings, there is an absence of conversation on how decisions affect people, humans and their hearts and their lifestyles. And so you'll hear from the panelists about how, and you'll hear from the companies about how the sound is not more than a refrigerator buzzing. My refrigerator is really loud, my one small one. So part of, I think, what we're doing here today is to enable all of us to become more informed and educated on content and perhaps also on process, because the power really is with the people. We have a representative government, and I know we'll be talking about later on some creative strategies on how the leadership on this island can become contagious around the state. The decision makers are on Oahu. The decisions will be made on Oahu. Period. Now, how can we influence Oahu? So I hope that you'll continue as the time comes for you to ask questions to understand the system that's going on, is to keep in mind the people part.
And I should also add, when we conclude, we'll also be open to questions from the audience to our panelists too. So please stay for that. I wanted to mention that several of the European countries who first championed large-scale wind farms, like Denmark, Germany, and Spain, have backed away from this as a viable source of energy. They now report that wind farms do not reduce pollution and greenhouse gases as they were first led to believe, that those reports were greatly exaggerated. What is the savings, if anything, for greenhouse gases, pollution, et cetera, from wind farms?
I think one of the largest amounts of greenhouse gases is going into making the cement that you basically take rocks and pulverize them with fossil fuel powered equipment. Then you have to ship it here. Then you have to make the roads. You have to bring the stuff to the site. That's an enormous amount of CO2, greenhouse gas emissions. Second, what often is not discussed is that when you have wind on the system, you need to have spinning reserve. In other words, the fossil fuel generators have to keep going, ready to take over when the wind dies. We have been in a regulatory proceeding at the Public Utilities Commission where we pointed out to Hawaiian Electric they're spending $2.5 billion to upgrade their generators to be able to handle greater amounts of renewables. And we've asked them to quantify both the capital costs and the ongoing fuel costs for how much per kilowatt hour produced, how much is being generated on this fossil fuel side, and they have refused. So it's hard to either quantify the total CO2 or the total financial amounts when a large part of the equation is being left out. And we hope in the EIS process, the environmental impact statement process, to ask a number of very pointed questions on that, to force them to quantify whether CO2 is actually going down or up with this, and we haven't seen that.
The world is riddled with wind farms that have been abandoned, turned into junkyards. What is the shelf life of an industrial wind turbine, and what happens to them after they've used up their lifespan?
It's a great question. First of all, if I can take the liberty to adjust the language of our facilitator, they're not farms. They're not wind farms. Nothing grows there. They're industrial power plants that capture the wind and sell it. So David Murdoch is capturing a natural resource and selling it, and you're paying for it. So he's not a farm. It's an industrial power plant. Sorry.
And what happens to these turbines?
The turbines have a life expectancy of about 20 years. And if you look on the Big Island, or we have a handout inside that shows you the wind turbines that are still up in South Point that have never been taken down. They're just rusted and broken and stay there. One of the things that's kind of a flim-flam you ought to be aware of is that when the companies that want to develop these things offer community benefits, one of them is always, oh, we'll put money in escrow and take the turbines down. What they don't talk about is taking this 60-foot by 12-foot cement pad down. What they don't talk about is restoring those 30-foot wide roads in our hunting areas back to what they were, which was four-wheel drive dirt trails. So the life expectancy is about 20 years.
And what are the health and safety hazards, Janelle, from these wind turbines?
There's a multitude of health issues. The most common health issue, and I mentioned this yesterday, is sleep deficiency. And sleep deficiency, just on a light, maybe a couple of nights you don't get a little bit of sleep, you're grouchy. Now think of this for 20 years. For long-term sleep deficiency, debilitating disorders can take place that are irreversible. You can't just try and get a night's sleep and think you're going to be okay the next day. While we are sleeping, our body regenerates. The nervous system, the immune system. Studies recently are showing that long-term sleep disorder can also be associated with breast cancer. Because when women are up in the night, estrogen levels rise. There is a connection. There is a connection to heart palpitations, hardening of the arteries. Because of sleep disorders, your insulin goes up, not down. You can become diabetic. Have you ever gone to sleep, didn't get a restful night, and wake up hungry? There's a reason for it. Your body starts craving carbohydrates. So not only are you susceptible to heart disease and diabetes, you also are susceptible to gaining weight. These issues also affect your neurological system, neurological development. Kids can get ADHD. We have an elementary school up there. How are our children going to learn if they can't get sleep? They can't. How are they going to grow properly without illnesses if their immune system is so weak? They can't. All these things are going to be disputed, and most of them are caused because of the wind turbine's low frequency sound. We have a low frequency sound that will not only travel in noise, but can be felt farther than you can even hear it.
Thank you. Now, historically, wind energy corporations have attempted to buy the support of small communities by offering them benefits packages. Where does the money come from? Is this viable, and what can we expect here?
So, is your question where does the money from the company comes from to give benefits, or is your question, are there benefits?
Both.
There are no benefits. You know, I think, again, from a people's perspective, we're talking about wind here and wind turbines as a methodology of generating energy that will feed into a cable that goes to another island. And the Sierra Club nationally is on record supporting wind as an alternative source of energy. And so many of you are members of the Sierra Club. I am as well. I think we have to ask different questions, and I know you're wrestling with the questions, but we have to ask different questions. The main question here that my colleagues and the government needs to think about is this system that is relying upon a cable, whether it's wind or solar or wave energy or whatever energy goes into the system, is the system the right system that we want to support? The system is cable going from one island to another island using some source that they call renewable, and it's fairly sexy to be talking about wind. Is this system the one we want that perpetuates a utility company continuing to be a generator versus a distributor? I am a language arts major. I'm not an energy person. I'm not an environmental person. But what I know to be true, having been in legislative office, is that words are really important. You can move a word around, and it means that your whole life will turn around. And so, would you like to rephrase that question about benefits?
Well, can I follow up on that?
The wind companies oftentimes offer benefits packages to convince the community to go along with their plan, and I'm sure one is going to be offered here. So, and Lanai too.
Go ahead, Henry.
Benefit discussion is premature until, as Lila just said, you pick which alternative you want. And right now, only one alternative is on the table. We need to put the others on.
From a very practical perspective, we're about a year and a half ahead, I hesitate to use that term, ahead of Molokai, but that's because they've had a community benefits package out in our community. But it's an oxymoron. It's not a community discussion, and it's not a benefit to the community. I'll give you an example. One of the issues they say is that Castle & Cooke has agreed to, quote, maintain employment at current levels, unquote. Well, they've laid off 55% of their workforce in the last 2.5 years. So they would maintain employment at the lowest level it's been since Murdoch bought most of Lanai. So it's a scam. This benefits. We, Friends of Lanai, believes there aren't, as Lila said, there are no benefits that justify taking a quarter of Lanai to put up these wind power plants.
Currently, there are 485 organizations in 22 Greg. European countries. Oh,
Can I touch on that?
You surely may.
Benefit, so-called benefit factor. Hush money. That's what it is. It's hush money. You sign a so-called good neighbor agreement so that you cannot sue them. It's a gag order. Don't do it. Why are they gagging people? If they're so energy efficient and this is so clean, what dirt are they hiding that they have to shut us up? Excuse my language, I don't usually say that word. But it's a gag order, and you get paid for it.
Let me just add one thing to that. I don't know that they're doing this here or not, but what they're trying to do on Lanai, and what they've done in many mainland communities, is pick the community apart. And they'll say, Davey, we'll offer you, X number of dollars if you support this thing. And so be careful that they don't do that to you. Don't let them do that to you.
And if I can just ask a question at the moment, maybe Robin and all of us, who is they? We talk often about government over there, or they will do this. Melly and I are part of the they. You are part of the they. And so I think if we can become clearer on who it is that we're talking about, and not to demonize the person, but to hold systems accountable. That's what this panel and that's what all of this work is about. It's not to point fingers at the person's name, but there's a role and there's a responsibility that is inherent in every position. So when we talk about Castle and Cook, it is one landowner, and that, he has a name, yes.
I'll give you an example of who they are. The longest transmission line fight in the state history was Bahila Ridge, 1971 to 2002. The last 6 years, we were involved, along with Manoa and the Outdoor Circle, in stopping the line in a fight before the Board of Land and Natural Resources. While that fight was going on, Hawaiian Electric was secretly meeting with certain members of some of the organizations involved in the fight, arguing that we might lose and therefore they better have a fallback position. That is not the way to go. The way to go is to have a firm opposition on our side and to find weaknesses that split the other side apart.
Unfortunately, we're running a little over time, so we're going to hold questions from the audience until the next panel, which begins at 2 or 2:15, so we can get on to the next performance here. So I want to thank the panelists very much. Several of them will be back at 2 o'clock, but Daviana needs to say one more thing.
I won't be here for the second panel. I wanted to just say that as I've been walking around and enjoying all of the exhibits and listening to everyone and the mana'o, the one thing that keeps coming to me in my na'au was the word maka'ala. And maka'ala, as you know, is to be careful, watch, be alert. And I think, especially with the last question about community benefits, that's where we need to really be maka'ala and watchful that we don't let ourselves be split over what might be offered as short-term benefits, because we know that in the long run, this wind project will destroy the way of life here on Molokai. I think a lot of the alternatives that are being looked at also have that potential. Wind, especially, another would be geothermal. I call it, rather than, if you look and break down the word alternative, it's alter-native. It is altering the native way of life, and it is altering the native resources. And I ask all of us to maka'ala and mahalo and aloha.
Thank you.
And I ditto that. I want to thank you for having Lanai represented here today, and I look forward to continuing this struggle as two islands working together.
And on behalf of Oahu, we will be all available during the break, so please come chat with us and give us your mana'o as well so that we can bring it all together. Thank you.
And as an outsider, it is your decision what you do, and we will help you.
Hello. I want to thank everybody for being here, supporting this group. And I want you guys to all get educated. Share with your family, your friends, everybody on the other islands. I have some information here so you can start your research. I guarantee you pull up one of these sites, you're going to continue to research. If I'm going to lay my life on the line for the benefit of someone else, it's not going to be Abercrombie's choice. It's going to be mine. What do you say?